Welcome back everybody. We're turning to a new section today, and this section is called Tuning the Letter. And this section is all about grammatical range and accuracy, the last of the band descriptor categories which we haven't looked at yet. And in this first lecture of the section, we're going to be talking about complex sentences, why they're important in terms of the band descriptors, what complex sentences are, how you can use them, and we'll also be looking at how they can be used in formal and informal letters in different ways and in different letter purposes. So let's get started and think about those band descriptors again. Why does complexity matter? Well, it's all about, in band descriptor terms at least, the difference between a band 6 and a band 7 and above as well. So band 6, we're told that the writer uses a mix of simple and complex sentence forms, whereas band 7 says uses a variety of complex structures. Band 8, I haven't written it here, but band 8 I think uses a wide range of sentence constructions. So you can see that basically it's just a case of increasing complexity throughout. Now, what does this mean? It does not mean that a band 7 requires no simple sentences. Simple sentences can have their place. Okay, so don't feel like every single sentence that you write has to be complex. You want to use a variety of sentence structures, but you need to show your comfort and confidence using complex structures. It means that we cannot depend on only writing perfect simple sentences to secure a band 7. So if you only write simple sentences, or if you only write one or two complex sentences, or one complex sentence, you are definitely going to struggle to achieve a band 7. So we need a good number of complex sentences too. So let's think about complex sentences in formal letters, and before we get there, let's think about what a complex sentence is. So a complex sentence joins a dependent clause to an independent clause by way of something called a subordinating conjunction. Let's have a look at this in more detail. So an independent clause can exist independently. It doesn't need another part of the sentence to make sense. So for example, our experience of the hotel was awful. You could say this and it would make sense. You wouldn't leave the listener or the reader hanging on your next words. Whereas the next part, the dependent clause, although we were very much looking forward to our visit, hopefully in my voice you can already hear that you leave the listener dangling. They're expecting more from the sentence because this clause does not make sense on its own. Therefore, it is dependent on some more text to make sense. It's dependent on the independent clause. Although we were very much looking forward to our visit, what? And we join these two expressions together using the subordinated conjunction, in this case, although, which you can see above there, although we were very much looking forward to our visit. You put all these together and what you come up with is this. Although we were very much looking forward to our visit, our experience of the hotel was awful. There is our complex sentence. So we're going to look at how to create a few more of these in the context of formal letters while looking at different letter purposes as well. But here's just another example to really drive the point home. While I had read excellent reviews online, I felt that the quality of food and service left a lot to be desired. Now, if we think about letter purposes, what is the purpose of each of these sentences? What type of letter purpose are we trying to put across with both of these sentences? Well, because complex sentences are great for emphasizing contrast, they are particularly useful in letters of complaint. Hopefully you recognize both of these sentences as complaint sentences. They're excellent because we can say, although I was expecting something good, actually it turned out to be really bad. You contrast the expected good with the reality of the bad. So they're very useful in that way. But they're also useful in other types of letters as well, which we're going to look at now. But in this exercise, I actually want you to create or try to create your own sentences based on what you've learnt about how complex sentences are constructed. So we're going to look at these one at a time. First of all, a letter of inquiry. I'm going to put some words on the screen. What I want you to do is to think about how you could create a sentence here. There is no single one right answer. There could be a number of right answers. I want you to use your imagination but also the prompts on the screen to try and create your own complex sentence. So here I've got part of the dependent clause, part of the independent clause, and the subordinating conjunction. They're not necessarily in the right order. You may need to move them around, the different elements around, and of course you'll have to add some of your own language as well. So letter of inquiry, lost wallet, no access to funds, until. A letter of gratitude or praise, bookstore closing, even though, found book. A letter of resignation, so that, new challenge, career progression. And a job application or covering letter, commitment and passion, wherever, been employed. This is not an easy exercise, but I do recommend pausing the video here and taking the time to write down a few ideas about how you could create complex sentences out of these elements. When you're ready, hit play again and we'll look at the sentences that I've created from these elements. Okay, so we'll start with that letter of inquiry again. I have, until this lost wallet is found, I will have no access to any of my funds. Okay, so notice that the two parts of a complex sentence do not necessarily need to be in the same tense. Here you've got the present and the future. So until this lost wallet is found doesn't make sense on its own. We need the independent clause. I will have no access to any of my funds. A letter of gratitude or praise. Even though the bookstore was closing, your staff member was kind enough to find and sell to me the book I needed. Okay. Again, you have the subordinating conjunction, which introduces the dependent clause, and it is affixed to the independent clause. How about a letter of resignation? I feel that the time is right for me to embark on a new challenge so that I may continue with my career progression. Okay, notice that we changed the order here. You don't necessarily need to start with the subordinating conjunction. Sometimes it will feel necessary to do so, but sometimes it's okay to put it at the end of the sentence as well. This sentence, it can work in either order. You could start with so that I may continue with my career progression, I feel that the time is right for me to embark on a new challenge. So either or here, but notice that again, we have that independent clause and a dependent clause introduced by a subordinating conjunction. How about a job application covering letter? I have always prided myself on my passion and commitment wherever I have been employed. Okay, same thing. Wherever I have been employed doesn't make sense unless you affix it to an independent clause. I have always prided myself on my passion and commitment. That does make sense on its own. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a good idea about how we can use complex sentences in a range of different formal letter purposes. Okay, now let's move on to thinking about complex sentences in informal letters. Now, even though informal sentences tend to be a bit shorter and less complex than formal sentences, we can still find plenty of opportunities for including complex sentences. Hopefully you noticed something about this sentence in particular. It's a complex sentence. Even though, subordinating conjunction, informal sentences tend to be shorter and less complex, both of those elements together create a dependent clause, we can still find opportunities for complex sentences, independent clause. Okay, so let's have a look at some specific examples. And first of all, try to notice whenever you are explaining or discussing time or contrasting. These are all great opportunities for informal complex sentences. For example, because Sarah has been forced to work overtime this week, she won't be attending the party with me, I'm afraid. Here we're explaining using the subordinating conjunction because. While you've been off gallivanting around the world, I've been stuck behind a desk working 9 to 5. Notice very informal. We've got these contractions, you've, I've, and these kind of informal expressions, gallivanting, stuck behind a desk, and here we're discussing time. And here's another sentence discussing time. As soon as you've finished your project, you should definitely come and visit us and take a well-deserved break. Again, we have these contractions and these more informal expressions, well-deserved break, you should definitely come and visit us, things like that. but again, complex sentences. We're going to do the same exercise now, creating your own informal complex sentences using the prompts given to you. Let's have a look first of all. A letter of invitation. You're working weekends because organised party Tuesday night. Letter of thanks. Once everything fell into place, showed me what to do. Letter of apology. Can forgive me if make it up to you. Hopefully you recognise one of the expressions there from a previous lecture. And letter of advice. Option A or option B, consider your own well-being, whether. Okay, again, there is no one single right answer for each of these exercises, but the main thing is that you're putting the different sentence elements in their right place and in a logical fashion. Okay, so I want you again to pause the video here, and when you have a list of sentences, you can return to the video. Okay, let's have a look at what I have. Let's start with that letter of invitation. Because we know you're now working weekends and have Wednesdays and Thursdays off, we've organised the party for a Tuesday night. Maybe I was a little bit mean here. I added the Wednesdays and Thursdays myself. Don't worry if you missed that part out in particular. Let's have a look at the next one. Letter of thanks. Once you were kind enough to show me what to do, running the program became so much easier and everything pretty much fell into place. Just idiomatic language there, fell into place, it just started working. We understood everything that we needed to do. Letter of apology. If you can find it in your heart to forgive me, again it's idiomatic language appropriate for an informal letter, I promise to do everything I can to make it up to you. That make it up to you we saw in that model answer from section 2 to mean we want to do something to show that we are sorry. And finally, a letter of advice. Whether you take option A or option B, the most important thing to consider is your own well-being. Again, in a couple of these instances, you could move the dependent clause to the end of the sentence. You could swap those clauses around. I wouldn't recommend doing so in the third one or the fourth one, but it could definitely be done in the first and the second. I think swapping the clauses around really impacts the emphasis that you want to create. And it seems to me that the clause that you close with, the clause that you end with, has the stronger emphasis. It leaves an impression, it leaves a more lasting impression with the reader. So for example, if we look at that last example, you can see that we want to stress the most important thing to consider is your own well-being. We've said most important thing, therefore it is obviously the more important part of the sentence, the more important message we want to communicate. So it would seem quite strange to put that at the beginning when the ending leaves a greater emphasis. So it's better to start with the dependent clause in this case. But try experimenting, playing around with these sentence types as long as you have a tutor or somebody that can guide you in the right direction and show you whether you are on the right track. But in general, I hope that this lecture has helped you to see, first of all, why complexity matters, what a complex sentence is, how you can use complex sentences in letters, and how complex sentences can change depending on whether the tone is formal or informal and what the purpose of the letter is.